Hello, ladies. I am so thrilled to be back here today, and to have you visit me is such an honor. And I hope that you will listen and get your work done at home so that it won't be a total waste of time. And today I'm going to begin by reading from Victoria book called Tea, the Essential Tea Companion. And it was written in 2003, I think, approximately. And it has several chapters in it on the different ways that you can use the tea ceremony. And I particularly think tea is very good in the morning, and it is something that I do when I'm writing my list. And sometimes I noticed when my daughter was teaching her children around the table, she had a book to read to them, and she fixed them each a cup of fragrant tea while they listened. So today's is called Tea on the Go. And here is a photograph of a basket that's used as the container. I do wish that the insulated picnic carriers that we have today looked more like an old-fashioned wicker basket, or were floral, or had more of an appealing look to them instead of so utilitarian. Be an absolute delight to carry out. So the little quote here is, each cup of tea represents an imaginary voyage, especially if it has a particular scent to it. You know, it's got a top note to it. If you bring the cup up to your face and smell it before you start gulping it down, every tea has a top note. And then as you drink it further, you can taste other things in it, especially if it's a blend. So here is what it says about traveling tea. You know, it's very frustrating not to be able to stop at a tea room on these long trips. And we live in a beautiful state, and I'm thinking if it were a different kind of civilization, there would be tea rooms dotted all over the country, all around by the roadsides, for people to stop at. And it would take a while for it to become common, but eventually, when you see something enough, you start getting used to it and accept it. And when we travel, I always imagine on some of these beautiful, beautiful hillsides that there's a little road going up there, and there's a tea room you can stop at and sip tea while you enjoy the beautiful valleys and the view. And so I don't worry too much about the world not being like it should be. I just write about it and create a story about it. And I will text my grandchildren about these imaginary tea rooms and the things that I did while I was out and the things that I saw, and they know it's a story. So this is called Tea on the Go. Bike it, hike it, or tuck it into a beach bag. Whatever repast one totes along always tastes better outdoors than in. I said that in my book, Just Breathing the Air, that my mother had a huge picnic basket, and she put ordinary food in it, but it tasted so much better once it was outside and we were sitting on a picnic blanket. But just as appetites sharpen in the open air, so does thirst. And nothing both quenches and invigorates like tea. Now, I would suggest taking a thermos of hot water, not making the tea and putting it in a thermos. The thermos itself sometimes changes the taste, unless it's got a glass interior. I would go ahead and just put the hot water in there, and then everyone can pick what kind of tea they want and make it from whatever you bring. You can bring loose tea in little bags, and so that's what I would suggest, because it does alter the taste quite a bit, and sometimes not in a good way. If it's just the two of you on an autumn day, carry along a thermos of tea and a pair of proper cups and saucers. Like I said, a thermos of hot water. Carefully wrapped and protected in a pretty tea towel. Or, on a summer afternoon, pack a clear plastic jug and a few tea bags. With a source of clean water and a few leisurely hours, you can make sun tea, letting the heat of the sun unlock the brew's color and flavor. If you have an entire afternoon, why not pack a full-blown picnic tea? Don't forget the jam cookies and refreshing iced clove tea. And then they have a lot of things here you can put in it. Current scones with smoked turkey. And there's a recipe for it and instructions. Pumpkin nut bread and beautiful picture. This reminds me, sometimes when we're shut in, how these videos on YouTube that I watch on cooking, I love to watch different ways of cooking ideas, and then also the tea time preparation videos. They are very calming because they're only showing good things. They're not there to tell you how bad the world is and what the threats around us are and all the things that we should be upset about or get us upset about anything. They're there to show you success in their food preparation and tell you the good side of what they're doing, no matter what kind of food they're presenting. And that if you are under any kind of stress, go to some of these things that just show you, that are just showing how they're doing something. One of the ways that we grew up was kind of watching our mother. We watched the movements that she made in the kitchen. She'd wash her hands, and then she'd get her ingredients out, and then she'd make a dough and wash her hands again. And she had her apron on, and then while everything was rising, she would clean it all up. We were watching all of this, so we were able to imitate it, and that's called learning at the elbow of someone. And when we look at videos, it's the same thing, isn't it? We're kind of learning at someone's elbow. We see so little of this in reality. We see so little of people working in the kitchen, and so we don't realize that we could alleviate a lot of the distress and tension in someone's life just by doing things like this. And so that's one of the purposes, I think, of watching someone do something. And even if someone is making a card and you watch them put all the little things on it, it's somewhat calming to some people. So this is what I'm going to finish with the tea time, and I'm going to go on to something else. And we had been talking in our ladies' Bible class about the word stress and distress in the Bible, and tears and the purpose of tears, and discussing with there are some people, believe it or not, older than me in that class. And so I asked them, can you remember a time when people didn't feel under distress or stress? And can you remember if they recovered? And they all said yes, they recovered. Maybe not forgotten. Maybe if it was about the loss of someone's life, maybe not ever really fully adjusted to it, but they did come out of it. They did recover and went on to progress in their lives. And I asked them why they thought it was so different now. And many of them said that today it is a prolonged stress. It is constant stress. It's constant bad news. It's constant one thing after another. And all you have to do to understand it is read the book of Job. First someone comes and gives him bad news. Then they come and give him more bad news. And pretty soon he's lost his land. He's lost all of his flocks, which is his living. He's lost all of his family. And then it just shows what happens as he comes out of it. And this is the problem they were saying today, is that people don't come out of it as well. And we started talking about some of the herbs and spices in the Bible that were used for other things, and the value of these things had an effect on your nervous system too. And some of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, some of the older women remembered some of these women that were from the 1800s, and they enjoyed lavender, the scent of lavender. Now, I'm not sure they had essential oils in those days, but they did have the scent, and they had the lavender. And I had brought in some violas from outside in the ground, and we passed those around and smelled them and talked about the effect they might have on your olfactory and nervous system and all these things. they talked about rose petals and rose water and things like that, and other things that people used for calmness that were natural. And we read in the Bible about how joy, weeping may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning, and how it's always darkest before dawn. And towards the end of the day, your feelings, your family might get a little melancholy, might get discouraged, might just feel just sorrowful, but joy comes in the morning. And then there was the scripture, those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. That one day God is going to compensate you for your sorrows, for your stresses and your tears. And some people say that today people get so stuck and can't seem to recover or move on from these things. Of course, we always have some sorrow and some memory. There are times I'll go through the house, I'll miss someone so terribly, I'll start crying even though they died 10 or 20 years ago. And we talked about the value of tears and what the tears were for. They flush out toxins from your body, and God designed them for a reason. And we talked about the many problems of the world and how they press on. They create depression, like press on someone. And so I want to read to you a little bit about these herbs. And one thing that was said in this class was, well, of course, the powers that be do not want us to know about these things that alleviate our distress or our depression or our sorrows, or help, soften everything a little bit, that are free, that are outside, the lemon balm being one of them. I heard a doctor say that you can't avoid stress, and some stress is actually good for you. It keeps you alert and keeps you thinking. But prolonged stress is the problem, where it's just this constant barrage of stress. And that's why the scripture says, weeping may come for a night, but there will be joy in the morning. You'll get a break from it. And you don't get a break from some of the stress that goes on around us. And homemakers suffer too. They can't concentrate on their homemaking. They can't raise their children. One mother said that she asked her children, was there a time in your upbringing where you remember we were not under stress? And they said no. All I could remember was a life of constant stress. And so we want to give people a way to alleviate that. And so one of the reasons that the powers that be don't want us to know about these simple things God's already provided for us for stress, like lemon balm and rose petals and the scent of certain things, is because they want us all on their allopathic system, where we buy their chemicals, and it'd be at great profit to very rich people already. So I wanted to read a little bit about some of these things. Now I mentioned that the lemon balm, this doctor had said that take a cup of lemon balm tea, and every so often during the day stop and have lemon balm. I found it difficult to find as a tea. I do grow it outside, but I found the tea bags or loose tea difficult to find, but you might be able to find it. Lemon balm. It's come from the mint family. It's not the same as lemon mint. It doesn't have that mint taste, but apparently it's very calming, and that people need a break from the persistent stress, the prolonged stress. You have to have that. And another way to be free of it is just take a couple of stretches a day, just a couple of one-time exercises a day. It does something to free up the mind. So let me read about from this book, and it's called The Language of Flowers. Or no, it's called A Bouquet of Flowers. It's written by Barbara Milo Orbach, and it was published in 1923. It was first published in 1923, and then she redid it someone named Barbara redid it in 1990. And so she changed it. She got it from several other books. But here's something called the lemon foot bath. Now, when I was growing up on the homestead, there weren't many. It was after the war, the Second War, and many of our supplies came from the Army Navy surplus, so we didn't have a lot of fresh things in the winter. We grew everything in the summer, and we didn't have a lot of the things. I never heard of using some of these things that the Victorians used because it was kind of not there at the time. But my parents did have a custom of soaking their feet in a bucket of hot water at night. I think they may have put apple cider vinegar in it or something in it. And it had a lot to do with keeping well, and there were just other elements involved in it. So this is called the lemon foot bath. Boil 8 cups of water, add 5 sprigs of fresh or 10 sprigs of dried lemon verbena leaves. Rosemary can also be used. Let stand till water is warm and comfortable. Pour into a bowl and soak your feet from 10 to 20 minutes. Rinse off with water. Now, the Victorians had these foot bath containers where there was room for one foot, right foot and the left foot, and would fill them with water. And it's so sad, we don't have them anymore. I know Victorian Trading Company had them for a while, but that company now I think is retired. I'm not sure that you can get these. They were called foot baths, and they had pretty flowers. They were ceramic, had pretty flowers on them. But you can use a little round shallow tub or a rectangular tub from the Dollar Tree, and decorate it if you want to. But it would be nice to have a foot bath. I know people take showers and baths, but it's not the same as a foot bath. It's an interesting concept here. So pour into a bowl and soak your feet from 10 to 20 minutes and rinse off with cold water. So now we're going to go over to the language of flowers here. Just a little article written by someone in the mid-18th century. So I hope you're getting a lot done while you listen. The language of flowers, Oriental in origin, was introduced to England by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu in the mid-18th century. In her letters from Constantinople, where her husband was ambassador, she wrote that there is no color, no flower, no weed, no fruit, herb, pebble, or feather that has not a verse belonging to it. That also, I think, has been hidden from our generation. It would be nice to look up these things and find out if there's any record of the prose and the poetry and the sayings about them, because they understood it so well. You may send letters of passion or friendship or civility without inking your fingers. And when they say inking your fingers, the ink pens that were used would leave a big black mark on, and for years I had one, because I remember back in the days of those old pens, the dipping pens and the fountain pens. Fountain pens weren't much better. They could all get your fingers very black. As a matter of fact, in the 1990s edition of Little Women, the DVD, the young woman Jo that liked to write, there was a camera close-up of her with the black underneath her nails and the black on the bump, the joint on her middle finger. It took me a long time to get rid of that stain. We did have those stains. So she says, with the flowers and the seeds and the feathers. And do you remember getting a letter maybe with a little feather in it? In some of the scrapbooking materials and rubber stamping materials, they'll have this little bits of things that you can stick on a card, and that may include feathers. And you can also draw your own flowers. You may send letters of passion, friendship, or civility without inking your fingers. Because if you send somebody a card and all it had in it was one of these items, a little pressed flower or something, it would have a meaning to it, and you wouldn't have to put the words to it, because everybody had a little book that would tell. The language of flowers, most popular in Europe, evolved into a list of sentimental meanings and thoughts. in which each flower had a particular significance. For example, a nosegay composed of globe amaranth, unfading love, bluebell, constancy, clover, be mine, and roses, love, would be an affectionate gift of flowers indeed. So if you like this idea as much as I do, find yourself a piece of lovely old ribbon, go out into the garden and make a special bouquet for someone you care about. And now I'm going to go to, there's another section here I wanted to read you about the flowers. Everyone loves flowers. To make us happy, they make us smile. And the fact that they arrive without fail each spring, peeking through the dark earth, makes even a hardened pessimist believe in the wisdom of nature. And yet, working in the garden on a clear summer day, the air sweet with fragrance, a soft wind rustling through the trees, and the sun shining on all the little masterpieces we call flowers, makes one stop to think how truly fragile all this is. Each day we read of another threat to our earth and all this precious beauty that we tend to take for granted. William Wordsworth's poem, The World is Too Much with Us, takes on more melancholy meaning as the years go by. William Wordsworth, I should read more of him. He was called the family poet back in the day. And this is a cute little book called A Bouquet of Flowers. I don't have the jacket on it. Somebody made off with that. A Bouquet of Flowers, it's called. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the Jane Austen diet. I've read pieces of this and a lot of it to you before, but rather than have to scroll back and try to find where I read it, I'll just reread some of it. And this is called Glowing, Lovely, and Happiness, and it's from, it goes along with my anti-stress theme here today. Glowing, Lovely, with Happiness, and it comes from his chapter. It's by Brian Kozlowski. It comes from his chapter, Health and Happiness, the Mind-Body Connection. And we talked about this in Ladies' Bible class on how one of the disciples of Christ and an apostle spoke of making sure that we let our bodies glorify God, because there is a mind-soul connection, a body-soul connection too. We're not just bodies and voices that are disconnected from our souls and from our great God. And so these people were aware of it. It's been somehow clouded over in this generation. We want to bring it back. And one of the ways that I found best for me was when I got into homeschooling, and I realized what we teach our children is also going to have an effect on their lives and on their souls, and they have feelings, and feelings are important. We were told when we were growing up back in the day, those of you who are of vital age, that our feelings didn't always, they weren't valid. They didn't have anything to worry about. They were just feelings. You just put them aside and did your work. And they had this saying, work while you work and play while you play, and it just made work grueling and not very fun. And then when they entered the 80s, you discovered people were encouraging ladies to enjoy their homes, to decorate them, to make them pretty, and when they work, to think about how they're serving their families and how they want to make it lovely, and how to combine loveliness with work and not be so impractical. As a matter of fact, Helen Andelin wrote in her book Fascinating Womanhood the danger of women being too practical, where they will not pay attention to the softness and the beauty of the home because it's not practical or useful, and not to become too practical because it makes them unfeminine and unromantic and maybe unrelenting sometimes. And so we have a chapter here that Brian Kozlowski wrote about the mind-body connection called Glowing, Lovely, in Happiness. That's another wonderful subject to study. Embracing the patriotic spirit of Regency England, let's begin our mind-body lesson by doing the historical, respectable thing. I've always laughed at this, blaming the French. And remember, in Wives and Daughters, Mr. Hamley said, "When I was young, we were content to hate the French and beat them at land and at sea." That's so sad. Uh, uh, it said Austin never knew to separate the mind and the body, living in an age when the mind and body were still intimately linked. There is nothing of which the physician is more frequently aware than the power of the mind. People had been connecting the mind and body dots since and before the Roman poet penned his motto, "A sound mind is a sound body." The Bible talks about having a sound mind. And you know, if you're under stress and you're in a constant stage of upheaval, your body will break down because you can't digest your food. You don't eat mindfully. Who dines anymore? Everybody just eats because they're starving and they just shove the food in their mouth. They barely taste it. And so then the stomach isn't receiving it the way that it should. And I've told you that dining is a process of looking and smelling, preparing, and getting your your mouth watering and everything. That's all part of the digestive process. And when we skip all that, then our bodies do not process the food the same way. And so if you're under mental stress and you eat, your food will not process the same way. I think that's why it's better not to eat if you're crying, not to eat if you're upset or worried. Now, a cup of tea, yes. Always tea. So, given her position as a minister's daughter, she clearly understood as literal, "A joyful heart is good medicine." Very soon her fictional character, Mr. Collins, would make the same connection in Pride and Prejudice. And you remember him saying this in the 1990s film. He was portrayed as a rather comical character. "As for my fair cousins, I shall now take the liberty of wishing them health and happiness." You know, people, I always found goodbye and hello rather awkward. I don't know why. I thought goodbye just sounds deathly to me. It has a hardened sound to it. But to say, "I shall now take the liberty of wishing them health and happiness," I think I'll do that. You know, I am vital enough. I could get away with some of this. It probably wouldn't work amongst a group of 16-year-old peers unless you wanted to be laughed out of the place. But I think I could get away with it now. He repeats the sentiment twice, as does Darcy. This is what Darcy says: "Accept my best wishes for your health and happiness." How polite. If it didn't sound too trivial after a while, if you said it with great sincerity, instead of like a memorized quote, imagine the difference it would make in people's stress. It soon has become very clear that you can't have one without the other. In Austen world, "Please accept my best wishes for your health and happiness." I'm just checking over here. See, it usually is shrugged off as just another one of Jane's sentimental plot devices, the way mood so intensely affects the overall health of her characters. On one extreme, Marianne nearly dies of a broken heart over her violent sorrow for Willoughby. Now you notice the distress that Marianne was in. Those of you who've read the books, I still don't have a copy of the Jane Austen books yet. I'm waiting for somebody to recommend the best quality I can get. I did order something once years ago, but they were printed online and the print was off center and some of it too crowded up against a margin. So if you know of any Jane Austen sets, I would really like to know which is the best and most readable and has the most quality pages. Because you know, when you read, you want to touch the pages, and there's something about that goes along with it, with the reading. And we did discuss in ladies' class what people did when they were grieving or in some kind of sorrow. And someone reminded me that in the story of Marianne and her, devastating loss of a suitor, and she was crying and crying, and Mrs. Jennings said, I'll get something for her. Does she like olives? And someone in the class said, well, olives are very good for your heart. And there is also a broken heart. They talked about in Victorian times, broken heart sense that you could get. And it was a combination of a number of things that are natural, and now I noticed online there are broken heart essential oils for people just to alleviate the stress of stress, of broken hearts, and they had very simple things in them. I think lemon balm was definitely one of them, and other things. So you might look that up for yourself. Essential oils for heartache or essential oils for grief or something like that, because the Victorians had things, not the essential oils so much, but they did have the little they knew what scents and what flowers and what greeneries, cypress and things like that were helpful. And now it appears we have nothing except people getting sick from their own grief, when actually we do have things that God made for us. Let me continue this. It says, it is usually shrugged off as just another one of Jane's sentimental plot devices, the way mood so intensely affects the overall health of her characters. On one extreme, Marianne nearly dies of a broken heart over her violent sorrow for Willoughby. On another, Anne Elliot comes fully alive the happier she feels, glowing and lovely, in very good health and very good looks. Smiles or frowns become such strong predictors of health in Jane's novels. It isn't surprising when the narrator of Emma expects us to believe that Jane Fairfax is a physical product of how she feels. Spending most of the novel worried and depressed over her secret engagement to Frank Churchill, her sickness and sadness, her troubles and ill health have the same origin, we are told. Yet, when finally happy again, Jane Fairfax bounces back to health in only a few short chapters. Emma had never seen her look so well, so lovely. That was fast, we snicker. These are romantic fictions, after all, but they also reflect a core belief of classical medicine. Confidence and hope do more good than physic, wrote Galen, the 2nd century Greek physician, which was still respected in the Regency medical community. But cheerfulness gives new elasticity to our limbs and circulation to our juices. Someone who could use a good circulation of her juices was Mrs. Smith, Anne's close friend in Persuasion. Though suffering from a crippling illness in dismal living conditions with no money to pay the doctor bills, Mrs. Smith remains remarkably positive and upbeat throughout her trials. She has a disposition to be cheerful. Neither sickness nor sorrow seems to have closed her heart or ruined her spirits, and it pays off. Her cheerful mind soon becomes a mysterious pathway to her medical cure. Mrs. Smith's cheerfulness and mental alacrity did not fail her, and she gradually experiences improvement of health by the end of the novel. Putting it in modern terms, Austen was one of the first novelists to promote the power of positive thinking, boldly claiming that health, good humor, and cheerfulness are biologically connected. It was her infamous shove it to the Descartes' splintered medical theory, and it would prove to be scientifically proven centuries ahead of its time. Okay, so I'm going to continue now with Linda Lichter's book. And I also wanted to make a comment about your stress and alleviating stress. First of all, we can't get away from it completely. Second of all, we cannot keep producing it ourselves. So if you can keep from producing your own stress, like creating more stress out of something, then there's less of it. The other thing is, there are some stresses you can keep out. You can keep out the world. And when the ladies come here for tea and for ladies' Bible class, I tell them we're keeping the world out. For this 1 hour, please don't talk about what's going on in the world, unless, of course, it's related to what we've read in the scripture. And sometimes it will be, because there was political upheaval during that time too, and during the time that the Bible was written too. But what we want to do is emulate the response to it in our current life, the way they did, the way it was reported in the Bible. So we tell them, let's keep the stress down. We're going to sing a hymn of praise. We're going to pray, and we're going to read these scriptures, and then I'm going to tell you about, and I'll find a Bible word like distress, and we'll go through that specifically afterwards. And or we'll do a herb, or we'll do something that you find in the Bible. We've even done Bible trees, Bible flowers, and it's most invigorating. I'm going to read from Linda Lichter's book, and she has a chapter called Keeping a Civil Tongue that I've been working on, and I want to finish it. And she's talking about cards, these calling cards. And if you'll notice, some of you who are of vital age lived at a time when people ridiculed all these niceties, all these formalities, all the drinking of tea. They mock people that drank tea, mock the teacup, mock the tea cozy, mock everything, And we went through that, and it's kind of sad. And even in the Victorian times, people were there mocking their own society, saying that it was too strict and they couldn't live up to it. People didn't want to be polite. The ones that didn't want to be polite, well, we have that in every era. Even the Bible talks about it. So she talked about the different ways people talked, and she did talk about the language of flowers and the language of jewels and the language of just the language of politeness and just different gestures, and the language of the hat and men tipping their hats and all these different things that they did. And men still do tip their hats. That's nice. Finally, she says, the antique language that today is most ridiculed and misunderstood involves the silent dialect of calling card etiquette. Now, I wish I have them here. My little granddaughter made me she calls these art trade cards, but they're calling cards, and you could write something on the back and leave it at someone's place, and people collected them. I think you can still get some printed by various stationery companies, little calling cards, and they've been replaced by business cards. Because what do you do if you're a homemaker and you just want a card with your name and your contact information on there? That's nice. So, but anyway, she watercolored these on watercolor paper cardstock and gave them to me. She calls them art trade cards, but they're like calling cards for her. In the Victorian ritual of paying calls, a visitor presented his or her card during the appointed hours when the lady of the house was at home, and that's in quotation marks. Although business cards rule the world today, using one on a social occasion was once considered unpardonably tasteless. You would not leave a business card at someone's home when you called on them, because it just meant you were only after business, and that's the crude world out there. It was not considered polite society. After being admitted by a servant or other family member, the guest had tea with the hostess, an encounter garnished with light conversation. Light conversation. We need to learn that. If you have heavy conversation, it brings a lot of stress. You start talking about controversies. You start talking about the threat around us. You start talking about things that aren't working out, or disasters, or just everything. So that's why this light conversation, we need to have scripts with light conversation. And it's just, hello, how are you doing? Have you been well? How is the weather where you are? I remember listening to some of this when I was a little girl in my home, when people would visit and they would talk about what they had been doing on their homestead. Well, a lot of people don't live on homesteads anymore, but you could consider your home a homestead. What have you been doing in your home? I have some unfinished embroidery work that I want to finish so I can get it framed and put on the wall. I have been reading about different ways to cook a certain type of food, and I've been catching up on all my correspondence, and it's so much fun to get a big stack of letters and stick them out in the mailbox. I had 8 people in one family. That's my daughter's family. There are 8 people in her family. So I got all 8 letters out there. I wrote them each something. I wanted them each to have something. And so we talk about what did you do to, in your life today. And what have I been doing? Now, I don't want to impose some of my harder jobs on people, like what I call the hoarder's room, that garage where you stick everything when you're in a hurry to clean and someone's coming. I don't want to tell them the details of that, because it just puts stress on them, and it could worry somebody. So, but it was called light conversation. It said here, after being admitted by a servant or other family member, I always appoint one of the grandchildren to answer the door when they're here, so that I can be continuing what I'm doing, maybe preparing tea or doing something in the kitchen that's important, or something for one of my children. So I'll just say, you can be the door person. After being admitted by a servant or other family member, the guest had tea with the hostess, and that's what the first thing you do is you welcome them in, and you say, would you like tea? And so then, I leave books and magazines lying around so they can, entertain themselves while I make tea. But I have tea in the room that they're sitting in. I now have stations everywhere, so I can turn it on and they can speak and visit at that time. So it says they had tea with the hostess, an encounter garnished with light conversation. Don't be afraid of light conversation. I used to think that they wouldn't think I was very intelligent if I didn't get into something really deep. And I decided that's just the opposite. Light conversation is the best thing. It preserves friendships. And if you start doing something heavier and you find out that the other person does not like what you believe, if you start getting into what you believe, it's better just to live what you believe. I believe I'm supposed to be a good hostess. I'll make you some tea and we'll have light conversation. But if you start revealing too much about what you think about everything, then that can create stress on them and also a dislike for you. So maybe we need more of the light conversation. The all occasion emotional gushing we call communication would have been, I love the way she expresses herself. She's always very polite when she's talking about the Victorians, but then when she gets into the modern era, she just crushes you. Her sting is very, very strong. The all occasion emotional gushing, she calls it, we call communication. See, this ruined the emotions, because people would say, you can't trust your emotions. You shouldn't be so emotional. But actually our emotions were, if taken in balance with everything else, given to us for a reason, and a good reason, and they help us to be healthy. But then because people use them for irreverent gushing, all occasion gushing, she said, uh, then we started to tell people, this emotional thing, you can't be ruling your life with emotions and stuff. And of course, that's true. But pretty soon, the emotions are in the background and not being used. Like when you mix a cake, you have the egg in there and everything, and you mix it together. You don't just take everything out. And so it flavors life. But she said, the all occasion emotional gushing we call communication would have been thought rude and self-indulgent in an era when conversation was an art to be nurtured and savored. In learning to chit-chat politely, the Victorians leaned to be respectful to a new or casual acquaintance, not just those we gracelessly term significant others. They did not take the liberty of inquiring about a stranger's religious or political beliefs. Now, of course, we're taught by religious atmosphere that you've got to make a testimony everywhere you go. You've got to express your religious beliefs and spread the word everywhere you go. But we forget that a lot of spreading our beliefs is the way that we conduct ourselves, the way we live, and the way we speak. And she says that they learn to be respectful to a new or casual acquaintance, and they did not take the liberty of inquiring about a stranger's religious or political beliefs. State of pregnancy. They never patted your stomach. I remember when that first started. Finances or sexual behaviors, nor would they have proffered such information about themselves. We have to be so careful what we reveal about ourselves, too, and keep our privacy. There is a great need for these lost civilizing lessons in today's world, but it is hard to imagine how we could incorporate them into our modern lives. We regard wasting time as the greatest crime. And I talked to you previously about wasting time and how time was presented by this world as being a commodity that was so scarce that you had to save it and you had to hurry and you had to not spend much time on anything. And then we discovered that the days were flying by. Well, then I discovered one day, and you probably have too, that the day on which everything was done slowly, methodically, quietly, pleasantly, seemed to be longer. So if you want to elongate the days, do things more deliberately and slowly. And there are people on YouTube that have the art of slowness or the slow day at home that you might want to watch sometime just to get an idea of what it is. And it's very beautiful. Victorian habits would flunk our efficiency tests, and efficiency has been substituted for quality of life almost, as long as you're efficient and not thinking and making everyone think mechanically about everything instead of with the heart, and they put the emotions so far away sometimes and then bring them out for the wrong reasons, that even cleaning up a bookshelf becomes an arduous task when it doesn't need to be that way. As you dust off each book, you look through it, you appreciate it, you think of when you last used it, you think of the people that were involved in your life at the time, or how you used it, or was it of any value to you, and there's more meaning to it. And you don't have to, quote, get that job done. You're not working in a bookstore, but unfortunately, we all feel pressured by this time thing. Thus, it says that the wasting time, most Victorian habits would flunk our efficiency tests measured in computerized microseconds. Thus, the custom of calling has been reduced to waiting. To modern critics, however, such old-fashioned customs even had an insidious side. According to one historian, They embodied the middle-class demands of polished performance and emotional self-control that reinforced class distinctions and deference to superiors. Well, yes, it was about respect. So then the moderns want to break that down and say, well, that's not necessary. Calling cards and calling on someone, that's not necessary. I would love to start sending letters to my grandchildren that had a pressed flower in them and just tell them what the meaning of it was, and then one day send them a blank note with the flower in it. According to one historian, they embodied the middle class demands of polished performance and deference to superiors, which is all respect. Luckily, so these critics' thinking goes, we have since unmasked the authoritarian impulse lurking behind these repressive customs. Look at the attitude that the moderns had, and of course they were moderns at the time of the Victorians too, who didn't want the niceties, who didn't want the politeness, because they just didn't want to do it, and they didn't want to learn it. They didn't think anybody else should either. So they systematically broke it all down till today we have hardly any of it. But through homeschooling, I got a lot of the manners books, a lot of the etiquette books, and we enjoyed it. It wasn't a strict punishing type of life. It was just being more kind and loving to each other is what it is. Today, members of all classes can be emotionally uncontrolled, and deference to anyone but oneself is considered dysfunctional. Isn't that sad? Since the current mindset is closed to the benefits of Victorian-style calling cards, it can hardly grasp the subtler but equal advantages of leaving silent messages via cards. If the Victorian hostess was not at home or unable to receive any guests, the latter would indicate the nature of their visit through the language of the folding cards. Turning down a particular corner conveyed congratulations, condolences, or the courtesy of saying goodbye before leaving town. Most importantly, leaving your card was a safe way to approach someone socially who might not desire your acquaintance. If the person did not return the call, you were gracefully spurned. No one hung up on you or slammed a door in your face. Although today we have technologies such as answering machines and email that could conceivably be used like calling cards, we have yet to develop a reliable and unambiguous system of using them. If a message is not returned, is it a snub or a software problem? I have read some of that to you before. Now, as we're progressing along here, I'm going to read some of Wives and Daughters. I have since watched it, since I last spoke to you, watched it again with a friend who had to stay here for a while, and noticed some new things. And this is from chapter 55 in Wives and Daughters. Now, this was written by Elizabeth Gaskell in the 1800s, and that was, I would say, 50 to 100 years after the Jane Austen Regency era. But still, some of a lot of the sensibilities were still there. And now it was late June, and to Molly and her father's extreme urgency in pushing, and Mr. and Mrs. Kirkpatrick's affectionate persistency in pulling, Cynthia had yielded and gone back to finish her interrupted visitation in London, but not before the bruit of her previous sudden return to nurse Molly, who had told strongly in her favor in the fluctuating opinion of the little town. Her affair with Mr. Preston was thrust into the shade while everyone was speaking of her warm heart. Under the gleam of Molly's recovery, everything assumed a rosy hue, as indeed became the time when actual roses were fully in bloom. One morning Mrs. Gibson brought Molly a great basket of flowers that had been sent from the hall. Molly still breakfasted in bed, but she had come down and was now well enough to arrange the flowers for the drawing-room, and as she did so with these blossoms she made some comments on each. "Ah, these white pinks! You know, we have pinks today. We have white pinks and pink pinks. They were Mrs. Hamley's favorite flower, and so like her. This little bit of sweet briar, it quite scents the room. It has pricked my finger, but never mind. Oh, Mamma, look at this rose. I forget its name, but it is very rare. and grows up in the sheltered corner of the wall near the mulberry tree. Roger brought the tree for his mother with his own money when he was quite a boy. He showed it to me, and he made me notice it. And that reminds me how it might be nice to bring in some of the wild things that you have growing outside. I don't do it so much, except for some of the cedar and some of these other things that have a nice scent for the home. It's more stuff to clean up, more stuff to throw out afterwards. Um, but they do have an effect on your senses. I dare say it was Roger who got it now. You heard Papa say he had seen him yesterday. No, Roger? Roger come home? Said Molly, turning first red, then very white. Yes, oh, I remember you had gone to bed before Papa came in, and he was called off early to tiresome Mrs. Beale. Yes, Roger turned up at the hall the day before yesterday. But Molly leaned back against her chair, too faint to do more than a few flowers at a time. She was startled by the suddenness of the news. Roger come home? It happened that Mr. Gibson was unusually busy on this particular day, and he did not come home till late in the afternoon. But Molly kept her place in the drawing-room all the time, not even going to take her customary siesta. So anxious was she to hear everything about Roger's return, which had yet appeared to her as almost incredible. But it was quite natural in reality. The long monotony of her illness had made her lose all count of time. When Roger left England, his idea was to coast around Africa on the eastern side until he reached the Cape, and thence to make what further journey or voyage might seem to him best in pursuit of his scientific objects. To Cape Town all of his letters had been addressed of late, and there, 2 months before, he had received the intelligence of Osborne's death, that was his brother, as well as Cynthia's hasty letter of relinquishment. He did not consider that he was doing wrong in returning to England immediately, and reporting himself to the gentleman who had sent him out, a science team, with a full explanation of the circumstances relating to Osborne's private marriage and sudden death. He offered, and they accepted his offer, to go out again for any time that they might think equivalent to the 5 months he was yet engaged to them for. They were most of them gentlemen of property, and saw the full importance of proving the marriage of an eldest son and instilling his child as the natural heir to the long-descended estate. This much information, but in a more condensed form, Mr. Gibson gave to Molly in a very few minutes. She sat up on her sofa, looking very pretty, with the flush on her cheeks and the brightness of her eyes. "Well," said she, when her father stopped speaking. "Well, what?" asked he playfully. "Oh, why such a number of things? I've been waiting all day to ask you about everything. How is he looking?" If a young man of 24 ever does to take to growing taller, I should say that he was taller. As it is, I suppose it's only that he looks broader, stronger, and more muscular. "Oh, is he so changed?" asked Molly, a little disturbed by this account. "No, not changed, and yet not the same. He's as brown as a berry, for one thing. Caught a little of the tan, and his beard is as fine and sweeping as my bay mare's tail." "A beard! But do go on, Papa. Does he talk as he used to? I should know his voice amongst 10,000. "I didn't catch any twang, if that's what you mean. Nor did he say Caesar and Pompey very much alike, especially Pompey, which is the only specimen of language I can remember just at this moment, and of which I could never see the wit of," said Mrs. Gibson, who had come into the room after the conversation had begun, and did not understand what it was aiming at. Molly fidgeted. She wanted to go on with her questions, and keep her father to definite and matter-of-fact answers, and she knew that when his wife chimed in to a conversation, Mr. Gibson was apt to find out that he must go about some necessary piece of business. "Tell me, how are they all getting along together?" It was an inquiry which she did not make in general before Mrs. Gibson, for Molly and her father had tacitly agreed to keep silent on what they knew or had observed. "Oh," said Mr. Gibson, "Roger is evidently putting everything to rights at home in a firm way. He had to come home and take care of his brother's estate." So, I will continue reading that at another time. And in the meantime, I wanted to tell you, to alleviate stress, have different times that you go and do things, okay? You're going to have a little break from the persistent stress or this constant stress. Have a little break. You go in and you read something aloud. You prepare something and you give something. And we had a little saying back in the olden days: make things, bake things, and take things. And I have looked at old pictures and have pictures of girls with basket taking, paintings done in the 1800s of ladies with baskets taking them to someone. And my little granddaughter, when she was very, very young, liked to fill up a basket full of stuff and then come to the door and knock and give it to me. These are wonderful reenactment things that you can do. Make things, bake things, and take things. Because when you stop and do things, now we used to, back in the olden days, make a lot of things, but it wasn't to alleviate stress. What it actually ended up doing was giving us an armor, an emotional armor, so stress didn't pierce us so badly. We had all these things that we liked to do. We had our painting, and we had our making, and we had, even some people made a hobby out of sweeping and cleaning house and singing or music, whatever they liked. And it created kind of a shield from it all. But now people aren't shielded from it, and they are hit with stress after stress after stress. And so it wasn't a preventative thing, it was just a shield. And like any war, there's always a war against the human spirit by the powers that be and by Satan himself to break down the mind, and through the emotions first maybe, and so that you can't function, and so that you'll get sick. Often when people have been hit with bad news, they'll get sick. And just as having a healthy body will prevent disease, having a healthy mind and doing these things will prevent being knocked over when you get bad news. So make things, bake things, and take things. And that's one reason people like to, when they were more shut in or shut down, which I always say, watched a lot of these videos that were being presented to help people learn how to paint, how to bake, how to create a meal, and many different many things. And you could watch them because these people they were on their best behavior, and they weren't trying to pollute your mind with stress. They were just showing you how to do something. So prepare yourself. The Bible talks about putting on the armor. You've got to have some kind of a shield. And so if you make yourself accomplished in a few things, or have something to fall back on, and when there is something like that, who was it we knew that when she got bad news, she started playing the piano furiously? And so that would be something worth considering. And can you remember times, maybe specific times, when you felt no stress? Any particular event, any particular thing you were at where you felt no stress? So maybe that would be something you could leave in the comments on the blog where I am embedding this, and that's where you can leave a comment. So ladies, thank you for all you do for me. Those of you who wish to leave a contribution can go to the PayPal on the sidebar of my blog, where I leave a link for it in the description box under the channel. But you can also write to me. You can mail me. And so until then, keep close to Christ, and I'll hopefully talk to you soon. Bye.